will you tell me when we're live?
Yeah. All right. Not sure that we're live.
It says, says on my screen that we're all live on
Yeah,
Facebook.
that's what it says on mine too.
Okay, cool.
Perfect. Okay. All right. Hello and welcome to United Athens County Tenants panel on affordable housing in Athens County. My name is Catherine King and I'm a member of UACT. We're a group of tenants working together to fight for better living conditions for ourselves and other renters. Some of our current activities include doing outreach to individuals on the eviction docket so that they are aware of nonprofit resources, hosting a Know Your Rights workshop so tenants are aware of their legal rights, creating and maintaining a website with local housing resources, and helping tenants who are on HUD to find housing in Athens County. UACT is excited to continue to grow and expand the work that we're able to accomplish in Athens County. So over the past year, housing insecurity has been particularly visible across the country due to COVID-19. As more and more people lose their jobs and face eviction, it has become evident that lack of affordable housing is a public health issue. Luckily, additional attention and funding has become available nationally to help people remain in safe homes during the pandemic. But the housing crisis is not new to Athens County. In addition to being the poorest county in Ohio, our county ranks near the bottom of the list when it comes to housing affordability and living conditions. UACT believes that it is imperative that we have conversations about this crisis in an open and accessible way. We are so excited to have 6 panelists with us today with extensive experience in the field of housing in Athens County. Our panelists come from different disciplines and they bring different approaches to a critical issue. I am going to go through and introduce our panelists quickly, and then we will jump into our discussion. Okay, so Claire Geisegem. Claire has been managing public relations for Hocking Athens Perry Community Action since 2017. She has a master's degree in public media from Ohio University and currently lives in Athens. She also serves on the Athens City Commission on Disabilities and the Board for Indivisible Appalachia in Ohio. Next, I have Keith Wasserman. For over 40 years, Keith Wasserman has invested his life into serving people who struggle with poverty and homelessness through the ministry he started in the basement of his home back in 1981. Keith is a Jewish Christian originally from Cleveland, Ohio, who became a follower of Jesus in high school at the age of 17. Good Works, Inc., and the website is www.good-works.net, was Keith's senior class project at Ohio University during his senior year in 1981. Today, Good Works serves people from all over Athens County and provides shelter to people without homes in 8 Appalachian Ohio counties. The focus of Good Works is primarily to care for widows, children in the risk of poverty, and people without homes. Good Works has a paid staff of about 16 and provides opportunities for over 1,100 volunteers to serve each year. Keith and his wife Darlene live on the west side of Athens, Ohio, and have one son, Timothy, who is 30. From the Good Works mission statement, Good Works exists to connect people from all walks of life with people struggling with poverty so that the kingdom of God may be experienced. Mary Nally is a native of Southeast Ohio and has a personal interest in contributing to regional sustainability by developing strong community resiliency. Social justice issues have been the driving force for her career. For 10 years in the Pacific Northwest, she worked with the homeless and persons with chemical dependency and brain disorders before returning to Ohio to focus on community health policy and food justice issues. She is the director of Ohio University's Center for Campus and Community Engagement. Mary serves on the Athens County Healthy Community Coalition and is a board chair at the Athens Metropolitan Housing Authority and at HAPCAP, the Hocking Athens Perry Community Action Agency. Sarah Grace is a mom of 4 and has lived in Athens for nearly 25 years. She holds a Master of Public Health degree and is serving her 2nd term on Athens City Council as a member at large. Sarah serves on the Planning and Development Committee and the Joint Policy Advisory Council and is the chair of the City and Safety Services Committee and the Affordable Housing Commission. She is also a court-appointed special advocate in Athens County Juvenile Court. Lucy Schwally is the managing attorney of the Athens office of Southeast Ohio Legal Services. She joined Souls in 2017. Before joining Souls, Lucy was a law clerk for Judge Mulan D. Smith Jr. on the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals and worked for the Oregon School Boards Association, Walla Walla County, and the City of Chicago Inspector General's Office. Lucy's work at Souls particularly focuses on helping students and their families advocate within the public school system, as well as assisting workers that may be treated unfairly by their employers. She is motivated to help her clients attempt to overcome the systemic barriers that can prevent our low-income community members from thriving. And finally, we have Jody Rickard, who is joining us via phone. Jody currently serves as the Chief Executive Officer responsible for the day-to-day operations of the Athens Metropolitan Housing Authority, maintaining regular financial accounts, records, coordinating projects, inspecting development sites, as well as approving all contracts for AMHA. So the majority of our panel is going to be questions that have been developed by UACT. The panelists have been given the questions ahead of time. For each question, I'm going to ask each panelist to keep their answers shorter than 2 minutes. I will call on panelists one by one to share their answers, and I'll let them know when their time is up if they run over that 2 minutes. And then we will leave the last 15 minutes or so for our audience who's watching via the Facebook live stream to ask any additional questions they may have. So our first question, according to the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, Athens County has the highest percentage of households with severe housing problems in the state of Ohio. Severe housing problems are a lack of complete kitchen facilities, a lack of complete plumbing facilities, overcrowding, and/or a household that is severely cost burdened. In your opinion, why are these problems so much worse in Athens County than in the rest of the state? So Lucy, will you get us started?
That's a really hard question to start with, Catherine, but I will do my best. So I'm not sure I can speak with great knowledge to the comparator of how Athens compares, but I can speak to sort of what we as attorneys at Southeastern Ohio Legal Services hear from our client population about some of the sort of substandard living conditions that often renters are in. So just for a little bit of background, at Souls, we represent tenants when they're facing eviction, homeowners when they're facing foreclosure or other housing issues that might arise, including conditions issues, which is, I think, what you just touched on there. One of the things that we see our clients struggling with is when they do have a situation where the rental conditions they're in are quite substandard. We have some legal tools to deal with that, but if the renter is behind on rent, we can't really avail ourselves of those legal tools. So what we see a lot is sort of this cycle of a tenant getting behind on rent, conditions getting worse in their rental property, and not having the legal abilities or the legal tools we have to work with those issues. We also see, just because of the housing stock in Athens, oftentimes clients reach out to us saying some of those things on their list. We don't have, there's not a complete kitchen. I want to fix this problem, but I also, I don't think I can find anything else, right? So when we're detailing sort of the legal options you have, one of those is often, if they have a voucher, moving the voucher elsewhere or looking for new housing options. And oftentimes that's just not a possibility, especially for the larger families that need multiple bedrooms. That seems to be, for our client population, a really tough find is homes that have 3+ bedrooms that are affordable. So that's a tiny window into, I think, what we see is just, but I definitely recognize the problem here. I'm not sure why it is harder here. I know that there are really unique issues to our region and to rural areas generally that I think are definitely at play here.
Thanks so much, Lucy. Claire?
Sure. So Athens County has the highest percentage of low to moderate income households. The average salary here, I think, is around $35,000 a year, I think. So that combined with generational poverty, lack of access to gainful employment, and the aging housing stock, like was just mentioned, they're all factors that lead to uninhabitable housing. And one thing that I've learned in my time with HAPCAP is that poverty isn't just limited to what's in the home, what's in your cupboards, what's in your driveway. It's also reflected in the infrastructure of your community. And that is pretty evident whenever driving down some of these roads in Athens County. And then, of course, there's student rentals, which isn't unique to Athens, but I lived in State College and Pennsylvania, where Penn State University is. And I saw the exact same thing with the ridiculous rent prices. But granted, the housing stock there is not as old as what's here. Landlords charge a ridiculous amount for rent in homes that are substandard. And they could easily be rehabilitated into affordable family homes. And there's also, I think, a wide misconception that students will trash the place since their time here is so transient and anyone between the ages of 18 and 22 is irresponsible. But no one deserves substandard living, no matter what their age is, no matter where they are at in their life. No one deserves that. And I think every off-campus student has a horror story about some health hazard that has been posed from their living situation, whether it's mold or electrical work or animals, which I have my own horror story about that. So yeah, like I said, I mean, no one deserves to be living in these conditions. And so, of course, there is, you know, our fair share of challenges with being in Appalachian, Ohio, but I know that we're going to be talking about resources and whatnot in the further questions. So I will wait to really elaborate on that when we get there.
Thanks, Claire. Mary?
Yeah, so I just want to start by making a statement that this evening, I'm not representing Ohio University or any of the organizations in which I serve. This evening, my comments are based on my own expertise and experiences and opinions. So my words are my own. I too am not intimately familiar with the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation's data on housing insecurity, but I kind of echo what has been said so far, that this really isn't just an Athens County or Ohio issue. This is really a national longstanding issue that has been with us for several decades. As I'm sure many of our viewers know, in the 1980s, President Reagan cut 75% of the federal housing assistance budget and transitioned the federal government away from building and maintaining affordable housing to various voucher programs, therefore pushing people that were experiencing housing insecurity to compete with everyone else on the open market to find and secure low-cost housing. Further, the responsibility and funding has really been pushed to local municipalities instead of being led by the state and federal government. And this means that local taxes for basic social services have been stretched further and further, while demand for those basic needs has only increased. This, of course, leads to a reduction in both the quantity and the quality of the services that our communities are able to provide, and leads to increased frustration among taxpayers and residents. And that can often lead to anti-homeless policies, or things like homeless shelters or how low-income housing being pushed back against from people with a NIMBY or not in my backyard mindset. But I think, you know, when I consider our community here locally and in this region, I think some of the specific challenges we face are related to our zoning and code policies, as well as our capacity to actually enforce the policies that we have on the books. And as Claire mentioned, our county and municipality infrastructure is in decline, and there has not been federal and state funding to allocate toward those efforts. And so that trickles down into individual households. And I'm just gonna name the elephant in the room. It's also related to the fact that we have a lack of living wage jobs that can support any upward mobility for people in this region, but again, also across our state and country.
Thanks, Mary. Keith?
Well, we're swimming in a lot of interesting topics, aren't we? I'm not familiar with the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation's report, but I have not personally noticed, because we serve 8 counties, a substantial difference between the availability or the quality or lack of quality housing in Meigs, Vinton, Perry, Washington, Morgan, Jackson, Gallia, or Athens. Maybe hockey might stand out a little differently, but you know, the people that come to our shelter are often waiting for some form of subsidy. If they do have part-time minimum wage jobs, many times they'll room together and they'll attempt to find a place. And there are some notorious places in Athens which are cheap, but also rather dangerous. We had 2 murders on West Washington Street within the past 2 years. And that's a place where people can live. You know, the issue of affordable is an ongoing debate. I correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the city is involved in some engaging venture to build affordable housing. Is that right? Is that going on at $220,000 to $240,000 a year? I may be mistaken about this, but I'm not sure if anyone would see that as affordable housing. But a lot of the folks that we serve and are trying to help are waiting for some kind of subsidy to assist them as they move into housing. And one thing that has not been mentioned is that, and you can speak to this, Athens metropolitan housing people, you know, the landlords in Athens County will make a lot more money renting to students than with the amount of money that HUD is willing to pay for an apartment. And that's called free enterprise, market value, and capitalism. And that's the society we live in. If you're following the local news, then you know that Procos has recently been disqualified from, and there was quite a few units that have now been pushed into or taken away. So there's been a challenge to find landlords who will earn less income, stable, but less. Although it's possible that's about to shift in the next year or so as Ohio University students diminish or less students come, the market may open up a little bit. When housing was built on Richland Avenue, both sides, we saw the west end of the city of Athens, particularly Brown and First Street. Those facilities, those houses opened up more, and they are still open. Many of those are vacant now. So that's the city. Then you get into the county, things are different. Things are cheaper in Nelsonville, Gloucester, Buchtel, New Marshfield. Housing is cheaper as long as you have transportation. And the last thing I'll say is that most people know this, that transportation is the #1 issue that separates urban poverty from rural poverty. making rural poverty worse.
All right. Thank you, Keith. And Sarah, I have you up next.
Thank you, Catherine. So just very quickly, because Keith brought it up, the city is working actually with 2 different new housing developments. And the one Keith was mentioning is not intended to be affordable housing. It is the city's Affordable Housing Commission did recommend that the city work towards work through the process of allowing these buildings to be built, because they will be fully accessible, design, solar ready, really energy efficient, and they will be new high quality housing units that will be 2 and 3 bedroom. There will be a denser build, so there will be townhomes rather than individual homes on lots, and that's improves the number of housing units, the quality of housing units within the city, and thus addresses the overall housing need. Because if you have someone who can afford a $240,000 home, but they really need something that's fully accessible, well, with what we currently have, maybe they would buy something that's $185,000 and then spend the additional money to modify it in order to have it be wheelchair accessible or to allow them to age in place. So if the hope is that providing units just to increase the total number of housing units available in the city, that there will be then less demand for other housing, which you spoke to the capitalism. We've got supply and demand at work. And so, but then to go back to the original question specifically about the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation's data and their numbers, I have used the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation county ranking data a lot. It's really incredible. When I get into the website, I can do a deep dive and spend hours looking at different comparisons county to county. And I did that for a little while, looking at Athens and then all the counties right around Athens, because I was like, okay, why does Athens have this 22% number compared to all the counties around it? Because as Keith said, in many ways, the housing availability, housing stock quality is not that different. And yet their numbers range from like 11 to 14% have the severe housing problems. And I think there are multiple reasons why this data looks this way. One is that the source of the data is the American Community Survey. It's conducted by the Census Bureau. And one of the factors that, if true, puts a house in a category of a severe housing problem is that the household is severely cost burdened. So we know that students rent a lot of the properties within the city of Athens and pay very high rent, but have very low income. So their reportable income, of course, it doesn't include student loans or any financial aid they'd be receiving, their work income is very low compared to the cost that they're paying for rent. So they are going to statistically be severely cost burdened. And so I think that is one factor that makes Athens County appear in the data set the way that it does. Because that's the thing that makes Athens County significantly different than Meigs, Benton, Morgan, Perry County, is the large student population that we have here. The other thing that really stood out to me is, and it goes back to Mary's point about jobs, is that while jobs are hard to come by in Athens County, good, well-paying jobs with upward mobility, it may be easier than in many of the surrounding counties, because the other statistic where Athens was significantly different than all the counties around us is the percentage of the population that has a long commute to work. And in Athens County, only 23% of our population commutes more than 30 minutes to their work. Every county around us, except Washington County, was over 40% of their population. So demand drives cost, and many people in the counties all around us leave the county that they live in to drive for work. And so the housing in those counties is lower because there are fewer jobs available close to it. And also, I think the population of Athens is, as we all know, it's a bit unique compared to our Southern Ohio neighbors. And there's sort of a different vibe, especially within Athens City. A lot of people really value being able to walk or bike to work. And they have made the choice that they're willing to pay a premium for that option. And so again, that kind of drives the prices for people who want to be closer to their place of employment, whether it's the hospital or the university as large employers. So if we're really wanting to look at why Athens County is so different from our neighbors, I think those are two of the big factors.
Great, thanks, Sarah. And last we have Jody.
Hi, thanks, Catherine. I'm not familiar with the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation either, but I will pick up on some of the things that Keith spoke about. Our clients do fight to get affordable housing with us being a university town with the university students because, of course, landlords can get a lot more money from the university students than what they can from HUD because of our guidelines that we have to follow and the money that HUD gives the housing authority. Regarding the ProCo situation, it did affect a lot of people. It affected 58 total, but 17 was only from Athens. And out of that 17, we only have 2 people still searching for homes. So they are finding homes out there, and there are landlords. We're getting new landlords daily that are leasing up to low-income families. So that's a plus that I see in our area. And, you know, with the pandemic that we were going through, most of our clients received SSI. So it didn't really affect those folks as much as it did the folks that were working. But if they were working and then they would notify us, of course their rent would be reduced. But if they weren't on HUD, then I'm not sure if the landlords were in Athens that was renting to them that wasn't taking HUD as a supplement, whether they were reducing their rent to them. So it's you know, we do have a lot of issues in Athens County, but I'm not sure if it's I'm not sure if having the affordable housing that Sarah speaks of the building the new units, if it's going to help or not.
Great. So thanks everyone for answering our first question. I did let everyone go a little over 2 minutes that time, but this round I'm going to give a 30-minute warning or 30-second warning, and then like when you have 30 seconds left, and then cut people off. So I'm sure we're not going to have time for all of the questions that you had sent out, but I'm going to jump to our fourth question, which is about addressing the lack of affordable housing. So this question is, what are possible ways to address the lack of affordable housing in Athens County? Who should be part of this conversation? And who is ultimately responsible for addressing this issue? Do you have examples of what has worked for other counties of the state or the country? So first up for this one, I have Mary.
I'm so excited to jump to solutions. Before I dig deep too much, though, I did want to just remark on some of the comments from the other speakers. In terms of census, even if all off-campus students at Ohio University were excluded from the census and the poverty count and rates, our poverty rate would still just be at 30%, which is still unacceptable. Further, Ohio University students experience housing insecurity as well. And just because someone is a college student does not mean that they necessarily have economic privilege. In terms of solutions, though, I believe that we must approach both homelessness and housing insecurity as violations of fundamental rights, both solvable, but not as inevitable social problems resulting from personal issues or personal choices that they have made. Truly ending homelessness and housing insecurity will require cities and counties to systematically repair all of the cracks in our country's brittle and relatively shattered at this point social welfare system, our social safety nets. From drug treatment to rental assistance to subsidized childcare, the only way to address this crisis is through a concerted expansion of federal government assistance. And we need to acknowledge that that will be expensive and costly, but that is an investment in ourselves and our future so that we can maintain strength and dignity for all of our residents and all of our community members. For a start, I'm already 30 seconds. So I think, there are a lot of things that municipalities can do regarding zoning laws and having a fair housing ordinance that adds source of income to the protected classes prohibited from discrimination by landlords, I think would be one really critical thing that we can do and implement locally. But the key is really to identify strategies that can make consistent, dynamic, and permanent change.
Great, thanks so much for that answer, Mary. I have Jody next. Jody, you are muted if you're trying to talk.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, I agree with Mary. It's just going to take a lot to get it back in Athens County so that we have affordable and decent housing for everyone. I'm not sure if having the city do ordinances to make the landlords, if the city makes the landlords, let's just say they can't say don't rent to HUD or some of the other statements that they put in there, they're just going to come up with different reasons to not rent to low-income housing people, I feel. But I'm sure there's something out there that we can find that will bring better living to Athens County for our residents.
Thanks, Jody. I have Sarah next.
Thank you. Yeah, Jody and I have spoken a few times about that, the prohibition on discrimination based on source of income. And the problem is the cost of rental units in Athens within the city, which is like the total area that I would have any authority over as far as an ordinance, they're almost entirely priced out of what qualifies, like what meets the pricing guidelines that the housing authority is able to pay. And so they don't have to say we don't accept HUD. All they have to say is, sorry, our units are too expensive, you don't qualify. So I definitely appreciate the idea behind it, and have talked to a lot of different people and researched it. And in terms of making a practical difference within the city, I don't think that it would, unfortunately. But I think that increasing the number of higher quality housing units available will make a difference. There's going to be a new low-income housing development out off of 682 across from University Estates. That's going to have, I think, approximately 100 new units that it's rental units. Residents have to meet very specific income guidelines to qualify because of the financing going into the development of the program. So I think having 100 new low-income units will make a difference. The other thing, and the thing that I would really love to see in the county, is a community land trust. And this is something that I learned about from going to meetings with people in Columbus that operate one. And I met with people in San Antonio, Texas, where they have a large community land trust. And there are people from all over the country who are really, really trying to find a long-term solution to affordable housing, because it's not just here. It's not just in Athens. As Mary said, this is a federal problem, and many areas are dealing with a lack of federal resources and state resources. And municipalities just, we don't have the money without raising local taxes. And so I think a community land trust would really make a big difference. And it's a nonprofit community-based organization that maintains ownership of the land, but then the home or the dwelling that is on that land can be sold. And the entity, when you establish a land trust, that nonprofit can have whatever guidelines they set up for who qualifies to purchase the homes. And so it can be really specific to the geographic area where it's established. But then the trust holds ownership forever. So the homes, no matter what happens to the market value of homes in the area, the homes are sold for less than market value because the land isn't sold with them. And if anybody ever looks at their property tax bill, you have a breakout of the dwelling value and then the land value. And so if the trust maintains ownership of the land, the homes can be sold at below market value, and that keeps some homes perpetually more affordable. So I would love to see that established in Athens
Thanks,
County.
Sarah. Claire?
Sorry for going over.
Claire?
Sorry. So in terms of, the discussion of who should be part of this conversation and who's responsible for addressing this issue, we all are, all of us. We go to school together, we work together, most of us shop at the same businesses, we travel the same roads, so we have to advocate for each other. You can't look at the housing stock here and think that poverty comes down to individual choice. This is kind of reflecting on what Mary said. We need to vote people into local office who advocate for tenants. We need to know our rights and teach others about the rights to which they are entitled. I'm a bit more well-versed on hunger resources than I am housing resources, to be completely honest. But what I've learned is that the root is the same. We live in a country that has an abundance of resources, which is evident in our federal budget. But when you look at how those resources are allocated, then it's not a question of whether we have the funds or not. It's whether we have the will to protect and empower poor and working people. So given the state of food and housing insecurity, it's evident that we don't have that political will. And then in terms of what works, I know that one program that has been super successful across the country has been Youth Build. This is where young adults and high school students are trained in construction through experience in building affordable housing units for their communities. They receive certifications and credentials for the workforce, as well as that professional support network. So I know that Sojourners Care Network has done excellent work in providing those opportunities here in Southeast Ohio. I think we just, they need to be empowered so that we can see even more of their work.
Great, thanks so much, Claire. Keith?
Well, first, I'm grateful to hear all these thoughts that you're all sharing. It's encouraging to me. I have three particular contributions to this conversation. The first is that legislation, the legislators, whether it's city council or the county, can require builders at some level of units to do set-asides for low-income people. We know that tax credits are provided because the facilities in the Plains, the brand new lovely housing in the Plains, there's some set-asides. But that's something looking forward that's possible. I think needs to be it's being modeled in other places. Secondly, I don't see or hear too much about tiny houses, but in Athens, but I certainly see and hear them around the United States. And Austin, Texas has a beautiful example of some creativity regarding tiny houses. But, you know, the zoning here, we battled with zoning for a long time, just trying to help our neighbors. And, you know, then you have the power structure of the zoning board. You can see the challenge of navigating and negotiating a democracy with regard to zoning, who has power, who has wealth, and who's got control over the systems. So, but I would love to be involved in supporting tiny housing. And see, I had one more thought, but I'm not remembering it right now. So pause there.
Thanks, Keith. And finally, Lucy.
Thanks, Catherine. First, I have to do a small caveat because I am speaking as my role with Southeastern Ohio Legal Services. Because of our funding, we can't advocate for specific legislation to elected officials, and Councilmember Grace is on this committee. So what I just want to make clear, what I'm doing here is providing information about how some other government, agencies and municipalities, counties have dealt with some of these issues. So also excited to talk about solutions. So source of income has been mentioned a couple of times. I won't spend too much more time on that. Just to say that I agree it's a small population within the city of Athens that this would be a, financial, this would apply to. I still think it could make a difference, or at least we've seen in other municipalities, a difference is made when you can't, if you look on, I'm helping clients and they're looking on Craigslist, Facebook Marketplace these days, et cetera. I mean, you see no HUD just all over the place, within city limits, outside of city limits. It's the tagline at the end of housing, even if it is below, within the voucher range. Some other exciting things that other municipalities are doing, though, Columbus just passed they're calling the Housing for All legislation. I think it's about 48 hours ago. There's some really exciting stuff in there. One is that instead of requiring a tenant to pay a security deposit up front, there's another option for a tenant, which is to pay basically a monthly installment. They call it security deposit insurance. That would be huge for our client population because that seems to be a really big hindrance on the move, is that chunk of money you need for the security deposit. So that's really exciting. There's also in that legislation requirement that landlords provide a rental receipt, which I know you guys might think like that's not a big deal, but it's a huge deal for the tenants that we see coming to us that are being evicted for non-payment of rent. And they tell us, I've paid, and they say they've paid in cash or money order, and there's nothing we can do to sort of provide that documentation to the court. So that is huge. And then some other jurisdiction in Ohio have also passed something pretty exciting called pay to stay legislation, which would allow a tenant, if they are being evicted for non-payment of rent, if they are there the day of the eviction with all that money and the court costs in their hand, the eviction wouldn't go through. And again, you might think that's weird. I'm sure the landlord would take it. Why would they move forward with an eviction if they're being made whole? That's not the case. Oftentimes, when the landlord's already there, they paid for it, they just move forward with the eviction. So that would be pretty huge for that instability issue for renters as well. Also and Claire touched on this a little bit, but developing a culture of empowerment for renters, of knowing your rights, knowing what to do if there is a conditions issue, knowing who you can call. I think UACT is doing a great job of putting some of that stuff out. So thank you for that. And just, there's a lot of really exciting, successful programs like Habitat and tiny houses and things like that. So having the conversation, having it, openly and often, I think can lead to some solutions. So I talked really fast to try and get a lot in, and I could talk longer, but I will let you move on.
So much, Lucy. So I'm going to do one more question from our UACT questions, and then people who are watching on Facebook, if you have questions you would like to ask the panelists or a specific question, we're not going to have a ton of time, but we will try to take at least a couple. So the last question, and I'm going to ask people if they can just keep it to 1 minute for this one, but just share some highlights, is what resources would you recommend for an individual and or family that is struggling to find and maintain affordable housing in Athens County? So I have Keith up first for this one.
Well, one of the things we try to do is help people make healthy connections, relationships based on trust. And that's a really significant resource from my vantage point. People developing the level of trust and community together to help each other. And that's a real important value that we put a lot of time and energy into facilitating. We've seen a lot of really fruitful connections that have resulted from that. So that's the thing that comes to my mind in the minute that you are providing.
Thanks so much. Okay, I am going to go, hold on, I have my order written out. Sarah, I have you next.
The specific resources that I would refer people to, actually, I would say contact HAPCAP. They do a lot of really great work, and I know I've had rental assistance and utilities assistance available. So often, if someone can't pay their utilities, they can get some help with that, which could also help avoid eviction. And so I would say HAPCAP and integrated services as far as local organizations that are able to help.
Great, thank you. Lucy?
Sarah took the words out of my mouth right now, going to HAPCAP, and Claire, I mean, we're sending everyone, we're so incredibly grateful for the work that they are doing to get, I mean, the miracle working they are doing for my clients is just amazing. So they're turning things around fast. So if it is a, rent issue, if they're behind on rent, contacting HAPCAP. If it's a finding, finding places, our clients who have caseworkers at Integrated do incredible work on really trying to find housing. If someone is facing eviction or it's a legal issue, feel free to contact our office. We have, I think it's at this point, 8 attorneys covering 7 counties. So we don't have a ton of ability. We're stretched pretty thin, but we can try and help any way we can. And we can help up to 150% of the poverty line.
Yeah. Thanks. Claire?
All right, so I'm going to try to get through this quickly. I would recommend that households contact agencies such as ours, such as HAPCAP and integrated services to explore what programs may be available. But I know, and our staff knows, that there is a lot of hesitation for people to reach out, whether it's fear of, any consequences or retaliation or something. And one of our frustrations as, an agency is that we have to react when there were several opportunities for our institutions to be proactive. So when everything turns reactive instead of proactive, like these landlords who let the roofs and the floors go to the point of collapse, they leave tenants with no other choice but to reach out to us for immediate assistance. But given our funding cycles of nonprofit and government agencies, assistance isn't guaranteed to be immediate. So you're sending a message to tenants when you don't give them choices. It's just like being exploited by an employer. And the message that you're sending is you have no power. And that's no way to form a community. That message is reflected in our schools, our resources, the images, that we are portraying to the outside. But I think that a really treasured resource in our region is Southeast Ohio Legal Services, because they are educating people on their rights and, to empower our communities to advocate for ourselves, and with that knowledge about state laws and ordinances that are on our side. So I hope I got that under a minute.
Thanks, Claire. Jody?
I agree. We tell our clients to reach out to integrated services and have CAP. We are always giving them different information if they're struggling with rent or even their security deposits. We will allow them to pay in like 3 different payments if they don't have it all up front, just so we can get them leased up. We've even had them contact Southeast or Salvation Army, and local churches are even willing to help these folks. And we work very closely with Southeastern Ohio Legal Services. And you're right, some folks do not want to. They think that they're going to get in trouble or something, but we stress to them it's their right to use them if they're not being treated right from a landlord. But we're always constantly giving them the list of different agencies to reach out to. And we have a lot here in Athens County.
Thanks so much. And finally, Mary.
So in terms of resources for folks, I first just want to recognize that the majority of people that experience housing insecurity are kind of in the temporary category and not necessarily the chronic homeless or chronically housing insecure. And there's a diversity within this population. So, for many people or young mothers in particular, they may, need to be connected to places like my sister's place because most frequently young mothers are homeless because of domestic abuse at home. For young men, it's because they've been discharged from foster care or from prison. And so, we really need to elevate and inform people about those programs that assist those folks. And for our youth population, a lot of those young people are disproportionately members of the GLBTQ plus community. And so we need to make sure that they're connected to, Sojourners is doing amazing work in this region, as Claire mentioned, but other local resources would be the mutual aid networks, Habitat for Humanity, and so many of the agencies that have already been mentioned. And I want to include in that resource list your elected officials. So much of this has to do with policy. It really, really does. And so doing nothing is really not an option for our elected officials. Failing to acknowledge the impact and power of our policies, even at the local level, is a failure to acknowledge and address institutional discrimination for low-income people, which is even more true for people that belong to minority populations. This is the business of all engaged citizens and the business of our elected officials. Sorry, I'm very excited about this issue, you can tell, and very grateful for Catherine and everyone that has put this event together tonight. These are conversations that we really need to be having.
Yeah, thank you so much. So we actually were almost out of time and we don't have any questions on Facebook at this time. So I think we're going to go ahead and wrap up. Thank you so much to our panelists for sharing their expertise with us tonight. I know that I learned a ton tonight, so I imagine others did as well. A recording of this event is going to be available on United Athens County Tenants' Facebook and our website, which is athenstenants.com. I encourage everyone to check out the organizations that these panelists represent for resources and more information. And yeah, we look forward to working with you all to keep building a better Athens County. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Bye.